Good afternoon. I'm Raymond Blakely with the Texas Association of College Admission Counseling Professional Development Committee, and today I'm your organizer for a program we call Webinar Wednesdays. These webinars are designed for both members and non-members alike to keep them abreast on issues in higher education. This webinar is entitled Financial Aid 101. Financial Aid 101 will help high school counselors and college admission counselors understand the basics of the financial aid world. This will aid them in counseling and guiding students in understanding that college is affordable. Now please allow me to introduce our presenter for today, Taryn Anderson. Taryn attended the University of Dallas and worked in the Office of Admission and Financial Aid as a student worker while she earned a bachelor's degree in psychology. I need to also inform you that this webinar will be made available on the TACAC website following this presentation. Taryn?
Okay, great. Thank you all so much for joining me, and we're going to go ahead and get started into Financial Aid 101, and I hope you find it helpful for your students. The first thing I wanted to talk about is the obvious: how do students apply for financial aid? So there are really four options for students currently, depending on the type of student and the type of school that they're interested in. The first is probably the one that you're most familiar with, which is the FAFSA, and this is how most students will apply for financial aid for colleges in the United States. The FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and that first F is really the most important, and it's free. Some students will find themselves on FAFSA sites that look like federal sites, and the FAFSA is not free for them to fill it out. They need to know that they can go to their high school counselor or to the college, to a financial aid office at a university, and really get the help they need with the FAFSA without having to pay $40 or $100 to have someone fill it out for them. And especially since it asks for personal information, it's really better for them to go ahead and go to this secure site. So make sure that's the link that you're providing for students. We'll talk in a second about who is eligible to fill out the FAFSA versus these other applications. The next application is the TASFA, which is the Texas Application for State Financial Aid. There's a very specific group of students who will fill out the TASFA, so please understand that this application is only going to be filled out by very few students that you are working with. But when you do come across Texas residents who are not citizens or permanent residents, there is a financial aid option for them. There is aid for them in the state of Texas. So if students are eligible to file a FAFSA, they're not going to send a TASFA, but there are students who you may want to know that the TASFA is available for them. The CSS profile is the next application that you should be aware of. Typically, it's used in addition to the FAFSA or in conjunction with the FAFSA, but by a very specific group of schools. And I'll let you know what schools those are in the state of Texas, although there's many outside of Texas. And you can go to Profile Online at the College Board website to see a list of which schools require the CSS profile, which schools don't need it. Some schools still have institutional financial aid applications, so students may need to fill that out in addition to the FAFSA for institutional aid. There's no institutional application required in order for a student to get federal aid. There are a few schools who do not participate in Title IV aid and thus do not utilize the FAFSA. A good example of that some may be familiar with is Hillsdale College. So they have an institutional financial aid application that they have students fill out. So here's a list, and this is straight from the FAFSA website, so don't feel like you have to write down the whole thing, and the presentation will be available later to reference. But if you go to the FAFSA and you're wondering if a student might be eligible to fill it out, they can go ahead and start a FAFSA. They will go through this series of questions to confirm that they are eligible, and the FAFSA will let them know if they are or are not eligible to fill it out. But typically, if they're a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, or other eligible non-citizen with a valid Social Security number, they should be able to fill out the FAFSA, no problem. They must earn a high school diploma or a GED or complete homeschooling in order to be eligible for federal aid. So while filling out a FAFSA, they do have to be progressing towards that. So a high school senior can do it before they have a diploma, but they need to be earning a diploma prior to receiving any of that aid. And males between the ages of 18 and 25 have to register for selective service, and they will have the opportunity to actually do that while filling out the FAFSA if they haven't yet done so or haven't yet reached 18. If a student's been convicted of the possession or sale of drugs, they may be ineligible to fill out a FAFSA, and it will ask them a few questions about that and determine if they need to fill out additional paperwork or contact the college in order to be eligible. For the TASFA, for those of you joining us, we're going through some of the application options for students to apply for financial aid. So for students who cannot fill out the FAFSA, so those who are not U.S. citizens, permanent residents, or eligible non-citizens, if they are a Texas resident, then they can fill out the TASFA. And typically, if they're eligible to pay Texas in-state tuition, they're a Texas resident. So you may have already advised a student on that process. These are typically your undocumented students, but there are a few other categories of international students that may also be eligible to do the TASFA. They should contact the college to find out if they qualify, if they're a Texas resident, and also how the school would look to receive the FAFSA. Some schools, most schools need tax documentation, so some schools want it filled out online and certified in a certain way, but it's typically done on paper, not done online like the FAFSA is. It's not certified online. There are a set of Texas residency core questions, which many of you are familiar with, to determine if the student is a Texas resident, and the college and university can help that as well. The website where you can get a copy of the TASFA for your students is at the bottom of this slide and also at the end. It is College for All Texans or collegefortexans.com. The CSS profile is a little different because it's not free. And so one of the things students want to be mindful of when they're doing a CSS profile is if the school recommends or requires. The worst thing the student can do is send the CSS profile to a school that doesn't require it and won't look at it to determine aid. And in that case, the student may have wasted $25 or $16 by sending it. So there is a list right there in College Board that tells you whether it uses it for domestic students, international students, both. Some schools, like University of Dallas, only have international students fill this out. This is their application for aid, since they cannot fill out a FAFSA or a TASFA, but we will not look at it for domestic students. SMU utilizes it for domestic students. Rice, all students can utilize it, as well as TCU and Trinity. And St. Edward's, like UD, only utilizes it for awarding international students. The CSS profile asks a lot of the same questions that the FAFSA does, but it asks it in a different way, and it calculates students' family contribution slightly different. And so some schools will utilize this in addition to the FAFSA. Many schools utilize the FAFSA to determine eligibility for federal and state aid, then use the profile to determine eligibility for their own institutional aid. So at SMU, for example, if the student only submits a FAFSA, they may only be considered for federal and state aid and may never be offered an institutional grant. By sending the CSS profile, they can then be considered for the institutional grant, and vice versa. With only a profile, we can't award them federal and state aid. So if the school's looking for the profile, make sure you know they want the profile and the FAFSA so that they can make sure the student has a full financial aid package. The costs are at the bottom, so $25 for the first application to be sent, and then once you've paid that, $16 for any additional application. The profile is not as common for Texas colleges as it is for more selective universities in the Northeast. That's kind of where the profile started, and for those of you working with students applying to those types of schools like the Ivy Leagues, you may see the profile required more often. One of the other things that's different about the profile is it does ask for information from the non-custodial parent. We'll talk a little bit later about what defines parent and how that comes into play. For the institutional application, the school is typically going to communicate to the student where the application can be found and who needs to fill it out. But again, it's not as common. So a big question is, when should students be applying for financial aid? If you're working with seniors, they should be applying right now. January 1st, the new FAFSA for the 2015-16 year became available. So some of your students may have been online midnight on January 1st and filled it out. We've already received a couple thousand FAFSAs for our students. And it becomes available January 1st of their senior year, but again, January 1st every year. So they're going to fill out the FAFSA if they're going to apply for aid each year that they are planning to attend the school in the next year. So seniors can work on FAFSAs now. They need to be mindful of the priority deadline and the deadline, the regular deadline for the schools they're applying for. In the state of Texas, the deadlines typically range from February 1st through March 15th. So the student, if they have a February 1st deadline, they need to get on and submit the FAFSA now in order to be in line when the most financial aid is available. If they wait till after the priority deadline, there are some funds that may no longer be available to award. Work study is one of those funds that typically schools run out of. There's not enough work study for every student that has need. If you don't meet the priority deadline, it may be very difficult to get work study after a certain point. A lot of your students may think, well, I can't submit the FAFSA now because I don't even have, my parents don't have W-2s for this year. They haven't filed taxes yet, so we're just going to wait until April or May. That is not necessary, and in fact, it's not recommended. It says right in the FAFSA they can use estimated tax information. It allows them to even let us know they're using 2013 or tax information, and then it allows them to come back once they've filed taxes and make corrections to their FAFSA in order to submit tax documents. So financial aid is not awarded until a student has been admitted to the school. So sending the FAFSA early is great, but if the student hasn't been admitted, they're not going to receive a financial aid packet. One of the main questions the FAFSA asks is trying to determine whether a student is dependent or independent or having dependent issues. I'm seeing that I'm having some connection issues. Can everybody hear me? Looking like some people can't hear. Okay, so it might be your computer. It might want to call back in. Thank you all so much for responding. So one of the things that you as a high school counselor or as an admission counselor may have to help us figure out is who's going to provide information on the FAFSA. Is it just the student or is it the student and the parent? Typically, it's the student and the parent. That's the most common, especially for a high school senior. But there are some students that you may be working with who their parent information is not available. Maybe they're not sure who their parent is, and you may have been already seeing them for some concerns they might have about being able to afford college. One of the things that you need to keep in mind is that the student does not determine whether they're dependent or independent. Just because their parents don't want to pay for college, are not willing to pay for college, or want to provide information on the FAFSA doesn't make a student independent. The questions that you see are what makes a student dependent or independent. So if a student answers yes to any one of the following questions, they're considered independent and no longer need parent information. So you can see them there. They are listed right on the FAFSA, and the FAFSA actually asks these questions in a little more detail to each student and then tells them at the end, you are dependent or independent. They only have to answer yes to one. Most students are going to answer no to all of them and are going to be considered dependent and therefore are going to move on to the next stage, which is determining who is their parent for the FAFSA. Again, this question can be very easy for most students to answer. Who are your parents? The people you live with, you see them every day, they're going to help you pay for college. But there is a group of students who the question of who the parent is can be a little more difficult. So again, the FAFSA does ask some very specific questions and has this information available to every student who files the FAFSA to help them figure out who the parent is. These definitions have changed in the last few years with the changes to the Defense of Marriage Act, so keep that in mind. Remember that this is a federal form, so the definitions of marriage that are being considered are federal regardless of the state the student lives in and how that state defines marriage, which is important for your Texas students. Students from a divided home may have concerns about this question. The definition above, though, is pretty clear. It does not matter who claims the student on the taxes or what a custody agreement reads. So keep that in mind. What matters is where the student actually lives. They cannot choose which parent to put on the FAFSA just because one parent makes less money than the other and they want to be eligible for more aid. If the parent they live with has a new spouse, which would be a step parent, that parent is also considered the parent. Their information would be included. It doesn't matter if that parent is or is not providing financial support or whether they have adopted the student or not. A student whose parents are not married but living together, as you can see in this chart, both parents' information is included. So the definitions above are taken straight from the FAFSA. You can go to FAFSA's website and look at this. You can print this sheet if you need it as a reference, or you can tell the student, when you get into the FAFSA, go ahead and read the directions, which is always a good idea, and hopefully they'll be able to figure out whose information we need. The person who is considered a parent, their social security number and name will be included on the FAFSA, and their financial information is what needs to be included in the parent demographic section. The other information, the information from the other parent who is not included, the non-custodial parent, will not be taken into consideration for federal aid. But be mindful that on the CSS profile, a school can require the non-custodial parent form and can take that parent's financial contribution into consideration when determining eligibility for institutional aid. So what's next after a student is working on the FAFSA and completes it? The student can choose up to 10 schools to go ahead and send the FAFSA to. If they have more schools they'd like to send it to, they can send 10 at a time. So they can go in, pick 10 schools, go back in and make a correction and pick another 10 schools. They can send it to 10 schools all at once. They don't have to go ahead and go back in 10 times. What is calculated when a student submits the FAFSA is the expected family contribution, or the EFC. It's calculated based on the information provided, and the same exact number is sent to the student for their student aid board, and it pops up right when they complete it. That same number is also sent to every school that they list. Student has been admitted, then once we receive their FAFSA in the financial aid office, we evaluate it based on the cost of our school to determine the need the student has and what the student's eligible for. And we'll talk about what need is and what some of those things that we're looking at to see if they're eligible for are in just a second. Then the student's going to be sent an award letter or access to an online portal where they can view their award. At this point, your typical senior is going to take all of their award letters, compare their awards and the cost of each school to determine which school is affordable for them, which school, hopefully the school that is the best fit for them that they want to go to is affordable, and then the student has the opportunity to accept or decline certain kinds of aid. So they may have been offered $50,000, but if $10,000 of that is loans and they don't want loans, they can go in and say, I want $40,000, but no thank you, I wouldn't like the $10 in loans, and that's fine. They'll be told by the school how they can accept or decline things like work study and loans that not every student wants. So the big question that families want to know, and that you may also want to know, is who gets the money? This is the main thing that we are asked when we go into high school classrooms by juniors and seniors and sophomores, is where we know there's money out there, who gets it? The more need a student has, the more likely they are to qualify for financial aid, need as determined by the calculation that every school does. So we want to give you a more in-depth look at what's done in an office like mine throughout the country to determine financial aid awards. I promise you we don't just sit back and throw darts and randomly award students, although it might seem like that when you're looking at awards. There is a method to the madness and a technique for determining need that is used universally by all schools that accept the FAFSA. So once need is determined, each school works to meet a student's need in a different way depending on a couple factors: the availability of funds, the school's awarding philosophy, the mission of the university, and possibly how badly they want that student to come to their school. There's two main things that we need in order to calculate need. That's the EFC and the cost of attendance. So the cost of attendance is an important factor in determining how much need a student has. This is set by each school, so this is the part of the calculation that's different depending on the type of school you're looking at and maybe even the part of the country. It also can depend on, there are also other things that affect this, like the student's living situation, whether they're at home or on campus, for instance. The cost of attendance takes into account more than just tuition and fees. That's what's really important about it. It's a tool that helps schools determine need, but it also helps families plan for the financial responsibilities of college. It costs more than what we bill a student to attend school, especially in order for a student to be successful. For example, if a student only has enough money to pay tuition, fees, room, and board, and they show up to campus and can't buy books, they're probably not going to be able to afford tuition and fees the next year because they've got to meet certain academic requirements. Without books, it's going to be extremely difficult. So we want to make sure that the student understands there's a need and a cost for books, and hopefully some financial aid to help them afford that if they have need. Out-of-state versus in-state can also affect a student. Obviously, at an out-of-state public school, the costs are going to be more expensive for a student who's non-resident, but also things like travel and transportation can be taken into consideration. Even for a student in Texas, families often negate to include travel expenses, but if a student was considering UT and St. Edwards, they may not need to worry about travel if they're from the Austin area. But a student from Houston looking at Rice and SMU could take into account that travel may affect their ability to afford one of those two schools. So how is need determined? This is the basic calculation. So I used a family contribution for this as provided by the FAFSA of $15,000. So as we mentioned, that $15,000 is sent to the student, and then that same $15,000 is sent to each school. Doesn't matter where the school's going, the family can still afford $15,000 for 1 year of college based on the FAFSA information. What changes in this is the cost of attendance at each school. So at a private school, for example, $50,000 might be a cost of attendance calculation. It's pretty close to what UD's cost of attendance currently is. Public school, $25,000. Remembering that that cost of attendance includes tuition, fees, room, board, an estimate for books, an estimate for travel and transportation, an estimate for personal expenses. And then for a Texas student to go to a out-of-state public school, the cost of attendance might be $40,000. So we each calculate the need, and at the private school, $35,000 is need. At the public school, $10,000 in need. And at the out-of-state, $25,000 in need. We're going to go ahead and stop for a second and put up a poll question based on the information that was just provided. So I'm going to go ahead and open the poll. Hopefully y'all can see that and have the option to go ahead and answer. If each school meets 100% of need, which school is the most expensive for this student with a $15,000 EFC? I'll give y'all just a second to answer that. Okay, about half of you have answered. I'm going to go ahead and end that so we can see. And so a few of you answered the private school. Looks like one answered in-state public, a few out-of-state public. Most of you answered that they all cost the same, which is the correct response. So the answer is that they all cost the same because in this scenario, the student has an expected family contribution of $15,000. If every school can meet their need 100%, the cost for this family to attend would be $15,000 at each school. So the direct cost may be different, but taking into account the cost of attendance, it should cost this student $15,000 to attend private school A, public school B, or the out-of-state public school. That would mean that the private school awarded the student $35,000 of gift aid, the public school $10,000, and the out-of-state $25,000. And hopefully that makes sense to y'all. Unfortunately, this example represents a utopian world where every college can meet 100% of need for every student. Those of you working with students for a while may know that doesn't always happen. While we can meet the need of many of our students with scholarships and grants, we also rely on work study and loans to help close the gap, which means students may have to borrow to meet their need. In addition, they may have to borrow to meet their EFC. So some families with a $15,000 EFC may not feel they can even cover that, but that's the number the school's using, which means even if we were able to meet their need, they still may need to borrow, but in that case, they'd be borrowing to cover their EFC versus covering the gap. In most cases, it takes a collaborative effort between the parents, the university, the federal and state governments, and the students to pay for college. So here's some of the ways that we do meet need. Even though we can't meet 100% for every student with gift money, there are a lot of options that we're taking into account, a lot of resources available that we're looking at to see if a student qualifies. Some of these are automatically awarded to a student who completes the FAFSA profile, and some of these a student may directly apply for and then take to the school of their choice. So meeting, I see a question came up from Emily about meeting 100% of need. I'm going to go back one slide. $35,000 would be the calculation of this student's need. Meeting 100% of need would mean that we provide $35,000 to that student of need-based. So in this case, a $35,000 scholarship would cover the student's need, or a $20,000 scholarship and a $15,000 grant, or a $30,000 scholarship and $5,000 of work study. All of those would meet that student's need so that that student's responsibility to pay for college would be $15,000, and the school would provide the rest in some form of aid, would provide $35,000. So the first thing that many students are going to be awarded, and many of your seniors have already received, would be scholarships. The institution itself, as well as many outside entities, provide scholarships to students. Scholarships are free money. They don't need to be paid back. They're great. They are awarded based on merit. So the great thing about scholarships is even students whose families may not fill out the FAFSA, they can go ahead and apply and qualify for scholarship. Many institutional scholarships are awarded right when the student's admitted to the university. The next thing we typically are looking at is whether the student is eligible for grants. And that would be federal grants that you all are familiar with, like the Pell Grant, state grants, and I'm going to show you in just a second the long list that the state of Texas offers, institutional grants, which at private schools like University of Dallas, the amount of institutional aid that we offer is 20 times the aid that is offered to the students in the form of federal or state. So institutional grants can oftentimes be much more significant and can be upwards of $20,000, $25,000, whereas the federal and state grants may max out around $5,000. And then private grants, which the student might apply for on their own outside of federal, state, or institutional money. Next is work study, which many students are interested in. The federal government, the state of Texas, and many institutions provide work study for students. And loans, which again, the federal government and the state of Texas both have loan programs. Some institutions offer their own loans, and then there are many private organizations out there, mostly banks, financial institutions, that offer private loans to students. So here are some of the grant options that your students are going to see on their financial aid packages. The Pell Grant is the one that most of y'all are familiar with. The student will know if they're eligible for a Pell Grant right when they submit their FAFSA. The first thing that pops up for them is their EFC, and the second thing is, here's the Pell Grant that you're most likely eligible for. The thing about the Pell Grant is if they're eligible for it at one Title IV school, they're going to get it at every school, and they should get it in the same amount, unless a professional judgment is made at a specific school that adjusts their EFC. Their EFC is the same at every school, and their Pell Grant is the same at every school. This grant is meant for the neediest students out there in the country, and so it's not a huge percentage of students that get it, but the students that get it are the most needy, and they really do typically need the Pell Grant to make school affordable for them. The maximum Pell Grant, I'm not sure what it's going to be for 15-16, but it usually hovers just over $5,000 for the students who expected family contribution is $0, meaning their family cannot contribute anything, so the federal government's going to pitch in $5,200 or $5,400. That's great if the student's looking at a community college. It doesn't go quite as far at a state institution, and it's just a drop in the bucket at a private institution. Students really going to need more than a Pell Grant if their college options maybe include some four-year schools. The SEOG, or Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, is also available for our neediest students. Typically, it's in addition to the Pell Grant. And the Teach Grant is available at some select schools for your students who are interested in teaching, especially if they want to teach at lower income schools or schools that receive free, and a lot of students receive free and reduced lunch. The Teach Grant might be something they want to look into. It actually starts as a grant. The student signs a commitment, and if they fulfill the commitment by teaching in these specific kinds of schools, the grant remains a grant. If they don't fulfill the commitment, the grant becomes a loan. So the student should definitely be aware of what the requirements are, but there are students out there that Teach Grant is a great option for. It's a federal program. In the state of Texas, like I said, the state of Texas is great because they do provide a lot of aid for students. Here are some of the different grants available to students and the different universities that might offer these. So if you are eligible for a Texas grant at UT, you might be eligible for a Texas equalization grant down the street at Trinity. Not necessarily, because they do have slightly different requirements, but there is a private school side to the state of Texas aid. There's also a community college aspect. The nice thing about Texas aid, it's a little different than federal aid, is that Texas aid is not just for the neediest students in Texas. It really is available to lower and even some of our middle income families to help them afford both public and private schools in Texas. There's more about each of these Texas grant programs if you are interested at College for Texans, College for All Texans. If you aren't familiar with that website, it pretty much lists every program the state of Texas has to offer for students. Here are some of the loan options that are out there that students should be mindful of. The federal loan programs currently are the subsidized and unsubsidized federal loans, which are the ones that most families are familiar with. Last year, the interest rate calculation changed, so these two programs, the interest rate is reevaluated each year. 4.66% was the interest rate for 2014-15. So it may be slightly different for your students next year, but just to give you an idea of where those were at. They have the exact same interest rate. The main difference is that the subsidized loan is subsidized by the federal government, meaning the federal government pays the interest for students while they are in school. That includes undergraduate and graduate programs and professional programs, as long as they're enrolled half-time, and also during the 6-month grace period. At that point, the student has to start repaying the loan, and the subsidized loans start accruing interest again. The unsubsidized loan starts accruing interest from the day that it is borrowed. So that's the main difference. The maximum amount of freshmen in the U.S. would receive would be $5,500 a year. After 1 year of college, they can be offered $6,500, and then for their junior and senior year, $7,500. Unless they are an independent student, that's going to be the maximum amount that they can borrow from the federal government. And it's going to be hopefully a combination of subsidized and unsubsidized loans, but subsidized loans are need-based. So when a student fills out the FAFSA, if they have need, they can be awarded up to $3,500 of the $5,500 in subsidized loans. If a student fills out the FAFSA and their family made $10 million last year and they are not going to be eligible for any need-based aid, they will still be offered $5,500 of federal unsubsidized loans. It doesn't matter how much you make. Every student is able to get that whether they have need or not. So that is the value in a student filling out the FAFSA is having that low interest loan out there available to them. We do see families who could fill out the FAFSA and be eligible for that loan at 4.66 say, I don't want to do the FAFSA, I'm not going to be eligible for anything, and go borrow a private loan at 10% interest. So it really would be advised for that student to at least consider the unsubsidized loan. The nice thing is, it doesn't require a cosigner, it doesn't require a credit check. The student qualifies just by being a college student and filling out the FAFSA. The Parent Plus loan this year was at 7.21%. This loan allows the parents of a student, both custodial and non-custodial, to go ahead and apply for a credit-based loan that allows them to borrow up to the cost of attendance to help their student out. So they could use it to fill any remaining gap in need. They could use it to cover their EFC, and a student who is offered absolutely no financial aid could borrow the Parent Plus loan to cover the entire cost of attendance. I wouldn't be advised, but just so you know, they can do that. So sometimes we see Parent Plus loans that are $30,000, $40,000, and $50,000 if a student's not eligible for any other aid besides the unsubsidized loan. The Parent Plus loan credit credit check is changing this year. It's going to be actually more lenient and allow more parents to borrow. So families who wouldn't get a traditional car loan or house loan may still be able to get the Parent Plus loan and be able to borrow to help their student go to college. You can see that it has a higher interest rate than the unsubsidized loans. So typically families are going to take the $5,500 of unsubsidized loans or a combination of subsidized and unsubsidized before they jump to the Plus loan. But the Plus loan is in the parent's name. They borrow it because they have a student, but they are not going to be able to have the student pay it back. It's going to be the parent's responsibility. It's going to be on their credit history. The Perkins loan is a subsidized loan that is available from the federal government. Not every school participates in the Perkins loan, but it can be a really good option at 5% and subsidized. Typically, it's awarded to Pell eligible students, and it can be taken in addition to the subsidized and unsubsidized loans. In Texas, there are two main loan programs. The Beyond Time loan, I wrote on there if available. Those of you familiar with Beyond Time loan, you may have students that would just jump at the opportunity to take it. It's a 0 interest rate loan, and if the student graduates on time, which for most programs is 4 years, with a 3.0, the loan is completely forgiven. They do have to pay taxes on that as income once it's forgiven, but the loan essentially disappears. If they do not graduate on time or do not graduate with a 3.0, they have to pay the loan back, but it always maintains a 0% interest rate. The Beyond Time Loan program has decreased in funding. The state government is starting to pull back on the funding for that, so many schools don't have it available to offer to new students. But I put it on here because it's worth your student asking if, I know at University of Dallas we have a wait list for it, so if the students want to get on the wait list, they can, and if money becomes available, we will go ahead and award that. So be mindful of that. College for All Texans has information about the Beyond Time loan. The other loan program in the state of Texas is College Access Loans. So for Texas residents attending at a school, they can apply typically with a cosigner for the College Access Loan. The interest rate is 5.25%. There is a credit check required, but the nice thing about the College Access Loan is that that interest rate, as long as you're approved, is 5.25. Most private loans have a sliding scale of interest rates. The worse your credit score, the higher your interest rate. The College Access Loan is 5.25 and it's fixed, so that can be useful to some of your Texas families. Or where the student can ask about the Beyond Time loan, when they're working directly with a school on their financial aid, they should ask the school, do they have any Beyond Time loan available? Can the student apply for the Beyond Time loan? They will have to have a FAFSA because they typically will give priority to students with need for the Beyond Time loan, but I would have them contact the college that they're most interested in directly and see if it's available. For private and alternative loans, there's a lot of resources out there. Your college may have a page where they have a list of private and alternative lenders that students have utilized in the past, a credit check is always going to be required. The cosigner is typically going to be recommended, especially for your 18-year-old high school senior who has no credit established. And the interest rates can vary. There are variable and fixed interest rate products available, and the interest rates vary depending on the credit. So in some cases, the parent may not be a great cosigner for the student because their credit is not fantastic, but perhaps there's an aunt, uncle, or grandparent, or older sibling even, that's wanting to help with college, has good credit, and can help the student qualify for a lower interest rate loan. Work study, we have so many students that want to participate in work study, which is great. And work study, students who participate in work study average a higher GPA across the United States than students who don't participate. So it is a really good program and a great opportunity for students to get experience, hopefully in their field, which is the idea behind work study, that they have the opportunity to get a job perhaps within a department or area of study that they're interested in. They usually work 3 to 15 hours per week. I realize that's a big range, but it does change depending on the school. Some schools award more work study to less students. Some schools award smaller awards, but a lot more students have an opportunity to utilize work study. And so it depends when you go to the school, when the student is looking at a school. Over the summer before they attend, they should ask, how does work study work? When do I need to get a job? Some schools will require resumes and interviews. At other schools, the students may just list departments they're interested in and get placed and then work on the schedule. The great thing about working in a work study job is typically on campus, and it revolves around a student schedule. I know at University of Dallas, we don't require the students to work during midterms or finals. They can go home for spring break. They can go home for Christmas break, although some will work during that time. And whereas if you worked, you might make more money if you worked on the street at Chick-fil-A, but trying to get that kind of schedule may be difficult. So the work study is awarded to need-based students. Some may have institutional work study programs for students who do not have need, but the federal and state work study is awarded to students with need. So if a student wants work study, but they're not going to fill out a FAFSA, at a lot of schools they're not going to be awarded work studies. Keep that in mind. The idea behind work study is it's allowing a student to provide for their own education. Remember that it's a collaborative effort between the parents, the government, the school, and the student. And this may be a way for a student to actually earn some money that they can continue to attend college. So for a to award a student work study who doesn't have any need, although it would be great for that student to have some additional spending money, the needy student is relying on this money to afford the college that they're attending. At most schools, the student is going to earn a paycheck every week or every 2 weeks or every month. So one of the things students need to realize about work study is it's not going to be applied to their bill at the beginning of the semester. They actually have to work the hours and earn it. So they're going to have to keep that in mind. If they're going to sign up for the payment plan, are they going to put the money aside, and instead of using it to pay tuition and fees, they use it to buy their flight home for Christmas or to pay for books the next semester. That's one of the things about work study that we typically encourage parents and students to have a conversation about. How is work study money going to be used? And for a lot of students, work study paychecks are going to be the first way that they learn how to budget while they're in college. How's this money supposed to be used? And as soon as I get the paycheck, what am I doing with it? Do I have any money left over to pay for books next semester? There are some special circumstances that students may have, and you may be working with students who you come across and they say, oh, I filled out the FAFSA and the FAFSA did not ask me about this. Sometimes it's something that the school, the college or university itself can make an adjustment to the student's FAFSA information with appropriate documentation. And I did list some of the common special circumstance adjustments that schools will make. So keep these in mind when you're talking to a student, and they should go directly to the financial aid office at the school they're planning to attend or the few schools they're considering to ask what documentation is required and if an adjustment can be made. It is up to the school whether they will consider that special circumstance or not. But at many schools, we can take these things into account to see if a student qualifies for additional aid. A really common example of this is the divorce or death of a parent in the middle of a school year. That can be devastating on a student's ability to continue to afford college and even make it through the semester. And if that happens, financial aid office needs to know. That student may go from having no need to having need if that parent was the breadwinner for the family, for instance. All of a sudden, that student could be eligible for a Pell Grant and an institutional grant to help them finish out the semester. Most schools will make an adjustment for that case. Loss of a job, significant out-of-pocket medical expenses, private school tuition K through 12. That's an adjustment that many private schools will offer if you're paying private school tuition for younger siblings. It's not something the FAFSA asks about, but it's something some schools can make an adjustment for. A parent in college, a one-time income, winning the lottery or going on Jeopardy, or working on a consulting project, one-time income, and the dependency of a student. If that's ever in question, the student should go directly to the school to find out what documentation is needed to make an adjustment. Here's some other funding options that hopefully your students are considering or their parents may have already planned for them in advance. Outside scholarships, there are a lot of scholarship search engines out there and a lot of outside scholarships. Now that the economy is coming back strong, we have more and more organizations that are putting scholarships back on the line, and they want people to know that they care about education and they offer $500 or $1,000 or $2,000. And many schools keep lists of these outside scholarship organizations, and your high school or college may as well. VA benefits, which can be used at pretty much any school in the country, and the student should be in contact with both their VA rep and also their school to arrange how VA benefits are going to be used. 529 college savings plans. If the student doesn't already have one and they're a senior in college, it's pretty much too late to utilize that. But if the family has been saving for a while and has a 529 plan, they can use that to help pay their portion of the expected family contribution. Military benefits for active duty students. Texas Guaranteed Tuition Plan, which again parents would have been thinking about a while ago and may already have that saved up. They can use the community college, the private level, or the public level at any school. So if they locked into the public level on the Texas Guaranteed Tuition, it doesn't mean they can't take it to a private school or a community college. It's just going to pay out at a different rate. And summer and off-campus employment, which is a great opportunity for the student to do their part in contributing towards college. This calculator, I put up a survey about the net price calculator, and a few of you responded. Many of you have, in fact, encouraged students to use the net price calculator, which is great. It's becoming more and more common. And so the net price calculator is an opportunity, especially for juniors and first semester seniors, to find out if a school that looks too expensive may be an option for them. Would a student like them get aid at that particular school? And so I put up University of Dallas, our link, as an example. If you've never used one before, you can go ahead and go through ours just to see what kind of information it provides. It will tell you what kind of scholarship you're eligible for, what kind of grants, a Pell Grant, what kind of loans, would you be eligible for work study, and what your net price would actually be, or a student like you, if you decide to apply and send a FAFSA at University of Dallas. Every school in the country who's a Title IV school is required to have a net price calculator, so you can find it very easily on their website by searching net price calculator, or you can have your students go to College Navigator when they're looking at their schools, and they can actually link directly to it from there. There's a question that came up about 529 plans. Yes, it is reported on the FAFSA under the saving and asset question, so families will report that. Obviously, as they use the 529 to pay for college, each year they fill out the FAFSA, the amount will be reduced of how much they have available. And remember, the FAFSA is not taking into account the entire amount or the entire value of a family's savings and assets. It's only looking at a small percentage. So families may think, well, if I put $40,000 on there, but it's supposed to be for 4 years, then it's going to hurt my FAFSA. It's not. We're only looking at a small percentage of the savings that a family has, usually around 5% for the parents and around 25% of what the student has when it's calculating the EFC. So it's going to look at a small percentage of that 529 and say, well, this family has some savings, so they can contribute a little bit more for college. So 529 is option for families, even though it has to be included on the FAFSA. And the instructions in the FAFSA tell them exactly where 529s are included. The last slide that I have is some resources for you. These are all links of places that you can get information for your students. Obviously, the link to the FAFSA and studentaid.ed.gov, which are both federal sites. Studentaid.ed.gov also has publication and a college section. The publication section is where both high school and college representatives like yourself can order materials for free for their students. Some of them are available in a PDF if you want to have them on your website or use them in your financial aid presentations, and many of them are available in print form as well. And many of them are available in English and Spanish. So feel free, if you're doing a Spanish college night, to order some of the federal government's publications from them. They'll send you a box and you can pass them out to students and make them available. So that's a really good resource if you haven't been there. I mentioned College for All Texans and collegefortexans.com. College Navigator, where students can actually compare schools. Mappingyourfuture.org, edadvisors.com, College Board, and FinAid.org are all websites that talk about financial aid and where students can find information if they have questions like, should I include the 529 on my FAFSA? Those questions would be addressed on most of those websites for students and parents to utilize. So we left a little bit of time for questions. A few have come in through the chat, and we also have TACAC FinAid101 as a hashtag on Twitter. If there's any questions, submit there. If anyone has a question I can answer, you can also email me. Please feel free if you have a question, even if it's not about a University of Dallas student, but you need some general advice or an idea about where to send a student. And the University of Dallas's website is there as well that also has our content information, our net price calculator, and our cost of attendance if you're interested in seeing some of those things. Thank you all so much for participating, and I hope that the information provided is helpful to you and your students.